My wedding took place when I was 21 years old. In the days leading up to the ceremony, the older women in my community offered me daily guidance. They passed down housekeeping methods, shared their traditional recipes, and explained the ways of supporting a husband, while others spoke gently about cultivating faith and enduring patience. Desiring to be a prepared and dutiful wife, I absorbed every piece of wisdom. Yet, there remained a profound truth that went completely unmentioned by everyone, including my mother, my sisters, my aunts, and my grandmother. Following marriage, there are parts of their lives that Amish women quietly surrender, not under coercion or because of an explicit decree in the Ordnung, but simply because the fabric of daily life shifts, leaving an unforeseen ache that no one had equipped me to handle. I spent my formative years in a tight-knit Pennsylvania Amish community, living on a homestead located at the terminus of a long gravel road. It was a modest farmstead, but it provided a deep sense of belonging where neighbors were intimately known to one another and every corner held a memory. My greatest joy during those years was my bond with my sister, Hannah, who was 4 years younger than me. Throughout our upbringing, we were practically inseparable, working side by side, sharing our laughter, and holding each other's secrets, with any minor disagreements dissolving almost instantly. People in our circle frequently remarked that our connection resembled a deep friendship far more than mere sibling rivalry, an observation that was likely true. When Isaac Miller began courting me, Hannah was overjoyed and took an immediate liking to him, a sentiment mirrored by the rest of the community. Isaac possessed a reputation for diligence, honesty, and kindness, making him the kind of young man elders respected and the sort of partner many young women envisioned for their future. My affection for him ran deep, and I gladly accepted when he asked for my hand. Back then, I viewed matrimony strictly as an acquisition of a spouse, a shared destiny, and a household of my own, never contemplating what might have to be left behind. The wedding day itself was beautiful, filled with relatives who crowded into the home and friends who journeyed from neighboring districts. Though the lengthy church service left me weary by nightfall, my heart was full of joy. As Isaac and I made our departure amidst a crowd of well-wishers, my mother wept, my father held me in a tight embrace, and Hannah wept most intensely of all. I recall offering a light-hearted remark through my own tears, reminding her that I was not moving to the other side of the country. She wiped her eyes and embraced me once more, though neither of us truly grasped the magnitude of the transition ahead. The initial weeks of married life were filled with a blur of activity. My days were entirely occupied with baking, scrubbing, washing, tending the garden, assisting neighbors, and establishing unfamiliar household routines. Isaac proved to be an exceptional partner, demonstrating infinite patience and understanding, which left me feeling incredibly blessed. Even so, an unfamiliar sensation began to linger beneath the surface. For a while, the feeling eluded definition until one afternoon while working with bread dough. A humorous thought crossed my mind, the exact kind of story Hannah would find hilarious. Instinctively, I turned toward the doorway to call out to her, only to freeze mid-motion as the profound quiet of the kitchen settled around me. For 21 years, her presence had been a constant fixture in my life, and her sudden absence hit me with unexpected weight. Though I finished kneading the bread, a persistent heaviness remained in my chest. A similar moment occurred days later while sorting through a drawer and uncovering an old ribbon that triggered a childhood memory. Once more, my immediate reaction was to seek out Hannah to reminisce and laugh, only to remember that she was no longer there. This was my first real encounter with the unuttered reality of marriage. A young Amish wife often relinquishes the constant daily presence of the individuals who know her most intimately, creating a subtle but deeply felt void. As the weeks turned into months, visits with my family continued back and forth, and nothing was outwardly amiss, yet the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Our daily conversations had transformed into stretches of days, and sometimes weeks, without seeing one another simply because the demands of running a household took over. Spotting my downcast demeanor after an evening meal, Isaac gently inquired about my sadness. I attempted to dismiss it with a superficial smile, but he pressed further, sensing something deeper. When I admitted how much I missed Hannah, he looked at me with immediate tenderness, noting that it was a significant sorrow despite sounding small. We sat in the quiet for a moment before he shared that he had experienced the exact same longing for his brother after our wedding. It surprised me to hear this, as they worked together routinely, and he confessed that he had initially questioned his own feelings, wondering why he felt a sense of grief for his old life while being completely happy in his new marriage. Those words resonated deeply within me because they captured my exact internal conflict. My profound affection for Isaac and our new home did not diminish the genuine grief I felt for the life I had left behind, as both emotions existed simultaneously. When Hannah came to visit a few weeks later, her presence immediately rejuvenated the house. We conversed naturally while preparing the evening meal, and later sat outdoors together, recapturing the effortless rhythm of our childhood. At one point, she looked over and confessed that she missed me, bringing immediate tears to my eyes. When she jokingly questioned if marriage was supposed to reduce a person's crying, I laughed through my tears and agreed that it apparently did not. She then shared a piece of profound insight, suggesting that perhaps maturing involves discovering how to love people across a greater distance. Her words lingered in my mind as I realized this was the core truth that went unmentioned before my wedding. The sacrifice was not the loss of family, friendships, or shared histories, but rather the loss of perpetual proximity. It was a lesson in learning to maintain connections across a distance and sustaining bonds through the natural evolutions of life. That night, while standing under the stars after her departure, a sense of serenity finally replaced my anxiety. The ache remained, but it was no longer frightening because I understood that marriage had not severed my relationship with my sister. It had merely reconfigured how we shared our lives. This represents one of the quietest, most difficult adjustments for a young wife, who must learn new dimensions of holding loved ones close without needing their physical presence every day. By the following spring, Isaac and I relocated to a modest farmhouse owned by his uncle, situated on the perimeter of an expansive field where the closest neighbor resided nearly a mile away. Everyone remarked on how idyllic and serene the setting was for a young couple starting out, and initially, I shared that enthusiasm as I busied myself arranging our kitchen, planting flowers, and setting our things in order. However, the isolation eventually made itself known. Isaac began leaving before dawn to assist his father with the spring planting, waving from the road with a smile and returning only after nightfall, utterly drained from the fields. This quickly became our daily pattern, forcing me to confront long stretches of solitude for the first time in my life. Growing up, our home was a bustling hub filled with parents, siblings, visiting cousins, and neighbors dropping by, making the sudden, profound quiet of my new afternoons difficult to bear. I tried to convince myself that I would adapt, but loneliness settles in incrementally, building through solitary meals, empty rooms, and rainy afternoons. I never felt neglected, because I knew Isaac was laboring out of devotion to our future, yet intellectual understanding does not always ease emotional difficulty. One gloomy afternoon, after completing all my baking, scrubbing, and chores, I sat by the window watching the rain track down the glass with hours left before my husband's return. The silence felt suffocating, causing me to endlessly pick up and put down books and sewing projects as I paced through the empty rooms, eventually breaking down into quiet tears at the kitchen table from the sudden weight of isolation. Isaac noticed my distress the moment he entered that evening and sat down to ask what was wrong. Feeling a bit foolish since no tragedy or dispute had occurred, I reluctantly admitted that I simply missed the constant presence of people. His demeanor softened into understanding, which caught me off guard given his usual self-assurance and composure. He then shared that at 16, while spending a few months aiding relatives in a different district, he had expected to relish the independence, but ended up desperately homesick for familiar faces and the comfort they bring to ordinary days. The following Sunday at church, an perceptive older woman named Esther pulled me aside to ask how I was settling in. When I offered a polite, superficial response, she laughed and pushed for the truth, prompting me to admit my occasional loneliness. Rather than appearing surprised, she nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world, noting that nearly all young wives face this transition. She explained that one of the silent sacrifices of marriage is relinquishing the constant hum of a crowded household. Her words struck a chord, reminding me of how completely everything, labor, food, narratives, and difficulties, had been shared during my youth, whereas adulthood had now shifted those responsibilities onto my shoulders alone. Hearing her frame this first year not as a personal failure, but as a natural period of learning, brought me immense comfort. In the weeks that followed, I began to view loneliness not as a flaw, but as a necessary component of forging an independent identity and building a collective life with my husband. Deciding to actively cultivate my own fulfillment, I began visiting an elderly widow in our area twice a week, baking and exchanging stories with her, which provided mutual comfort and gave me something to anticipate. Soon after, I volunteered to assist a young mother who was recovering from an illness, which expanded my routine and broadened my world. Slowly, my internal landscape transformed. While I still valued tranquility, I no longer dreaded the silence. Months later, as Isaac and I watched an orange sunset spread across the fields from our porch, he remarked on my renewed happiness. Looking toward the horizon, I realized he was correct, and admitted that I had simply stopped wishing for my past life to remain unchanged. The reality was that no one had forewarned me that marriage requires a temporary step back from constant companionship in order to discover who you are outside of your childhood home. While that transition was initially painful, it ultimately fostered the resilience and confidence required to establish my own life, though an entirely different, unvoiced trial regarding my changing family role still lay ahead. By our second year of marriage, I felt securely grounded, having learned to navigate the quiet spaces and establish a fulfilling rhythm of my own. Yet, a more subtle transformation occurred during a Saturday visit to my parents' homestead. On the surface, nothing had changed. My brothers were working on machinery, my mother was occupied with meal preparation, and my sister's laughter filled the kitchen just as it always had. However, I suddenly recognized that the daily operations of the family functioned completely seamlessly without my presence. It felt like a selfish realization, but before my wedding, I had been an integral part of every decision, chore, and daily event, and now life had moved forward in my absence. Seeing the farm thrive and the household run smoothly without me brought an unexpected wave of sorrow, especially during supper when the conversation revolved around events, anecdotes, and dilemmas I had no part in. For the first time, I felt like an outsider in my own childhood home. Noticing my withdrawal after dinner, my mother sat down and gently pushed past my polite smile to ask what was troubling me. When I confessed that it felt as though life had moved on without me, her response was filled with deep empathy. Seeing the tears well up in my eyes, she squeezed my hand and asked if I felt as though I had been replaced, perfectly capturing my internal ache. She then surprised me by admitting she had felt identical grief after marrying my father, watching her own family adapt to life without her. My mother had always appeared entirely resolute and confident, so hearing her voice filter through that shared vulnerability was powerful. She explained that maturing requires accepting that your position within the family changes rather than disappears, marking a vital distinction. I was no longer one of the children residing under that roof. I was now a daughter who possessed her own household. For a long time, I had been clinging to a dynamic that was no longer possible, instead of stepping into the new role life was offering me. The clarity of this shift became evident the next morning when a timid 16-year-old girl from our church visited me, seeking advice regarding courtship. The request felt ironic, given how recently I had been the one asking the questions, but as we spoke, I recognized the same mixture of trust and curiosity in her eyes that I used to direct toward older married women. It became clear that life had not left me behind, it had simply advanced, and I was stepping into a new season of maturity. This understanding changed my entire perspective, allowing me to stop trying to force myself into past roles and instead appreciate my family from this new vantage point without expecting time to stand still. Marriage quietly shifts a woman's position from the center of her childhood home to the foundation of her own, a transition that carries significant emotional weight. It reveals that the depth of love is not determined by how much others depend on your presence, but by how deeply you hold them in your heart through every season of change. Walking home from church one cool, golden evening, I held Isaac's hand and shared that I finally understood that marriage is not an erosion of your past, but an expansion of your entire life. As he nodded in agreement, a profound sense of gratitude washed over me for my upbringing, my family, and the painful but healing lessons of this journey. The sacrifices an Amish wife makes are often invisible, a disruption of routine, proximity, and familiarity, but the resulting gains of purpose, home, and mature love are beautiful. Though no one cautioned me about these challenges, I am grateful to have lived through them, because some truths can only be truly understood once they are experienced. If these reflections resonate with your own journey of growth and change, consider passing these words along to someone who might need comfort in their own season of transition.